Hello, and welcome to the Southern Plains Climate Science webinar. Erica from the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program, also known as SCIP, and myself, Cody, from the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center will be your hosts. We welcome Daniel Denenpaul, the Director of Forestry for the Pueblo of Santa Clara, and Eytan Krasolevsky, a Deputy Director with the Forest Stewards Guild. They will share how they have worked together using fire as a management tool to put fire in the right place and time to keep the forests of the Pueblo of Santa Clara a healthy forest. Daniel and Eytan, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Great. So just an overview of our short formal presentation. So we're hoping to go through a few slides to kind of share a little bit about the place and the issues here, and then, jump into more of a conversational approach. I'm sure everyone's been in a lot of Zooms is an understatement in the last year, so we'll try to keep it less formal. So we're going to give a little bit about, introduce ourselves, Pueblo of Santa Clara, the Forest Stewards Guild, the organization that I work for, and the Forestry Department at the Pueblo of Santa Clara. Go over the landscape context because many of you may not be from New Mexico or familiar with the landscape. Touch on the challenges of managing for climate change and resilience in southwestern forests, and then hear from Daniel about the Pueblo of Santa Clara and his approach to managing for these challenges, and then enter into a discussion. So with that, just really zooming out, this is a map of the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. May be familiar to people on the Zoom right now. And then this blue star is the approximate location in New Mexico of the Pueblo of Santa Clara. And the picture to the right is of ponderosa pine forest, with the rock behind there is the iconic tough rock, TUFF rock, of the Jemez Mountains. That's a volcanic ash flow, and it's widespread throughout the kind of eastern side of the Jemez Mountains. So Daniel, this one's for you.
All right, well, thank you, Eytan. Yeah, just to give you a little brief history of Santa Clara Pueblo. It is a federally recognized tribe here in southwest New Mexico. The Pueblo, of course, encompasses about 90 square miles, starts from Bosque and goes all the way up to about 10,000, 11,000 feet, and is roughly home to about 3,200 residents. And, a lot of the people here today, they still rely on the land to, provide a lot of sustenance, such as, food and gathering of herbs and stuff like that, medicine, also the recreation, but a lot of it, the spiritual sanctuary as well. The land here since time immemorial, the people, again, have been utilizing this place, and it's gone through quite a bit of changes, having gone through, 3 different forms of government with the Spanish government, the Mexican government, and finally the United States. They are a Tewa-speaking people. They, again, going back to the traditional uses of the land, they do some farming, ranching, grazing, hunting, fishing, and pottery making. And you can kind of see there from the map on the bottom that the reservation is actually encompasses the Santa Clara Creek, again, which travels from the headwaters all the way down to the Rio Grande River. And that's just kind of a brief example of Santa Clara Pueblo. It's name is called Kapo Awinge, which translates to the Valley of the Wild Roses. And, you know, that's a kind of special place for them again, you know, going back and looking at that and kind of reminding folks that, you know, the people here still take that land dearly in their hearts, you know, and a lot of their songs and their traditions and their culture are centered around this area. And thank you, Eytan.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Really important context. So much shorter 35-year history of the Forest Stewards Guild is that it was a organization founded in 1984 based in Santa Fe that focused on land conservation to protect land from development and also community forestry. And the organization has kind of morphed and evolved over the years. And now we are a membership organization. We have members around the country. Many of them are professional foresters or other natural resource professionals. And then we have programs around the country where we're small staff of about 20, but about half that staff is based in Santa Fe. And we have a kind of body of work that deals with addressing issues facing southwestern forests and the communities that rely on them. And you can see that we have our mission and principles up on the left-hand corner, upper left-hand corner, and that our work falls in those kind of broad buckets that I took a screenshot from our website, that we support forest stewards, work with new forest stewards, and right now we have 5 youth crews running in New Mexico as an example of one of the things that we do. Those youth crews are stationed in the places where they live, and they're working on conserving their forests where they live. So that's just a brief overview of the Forest Stewards Guild. So over to landscape context. This is stitched together, you know, aerial imagery of the Jemez Mountains, and the dashed line represents roughly where the Pueblo of Santa Clara is. Obviously, their ancestral lands are broader than that dashed line. That's just like the current boundary. And the Jemez Mountains are dominated by this caldera in the middle of it, this old volcano. And here we have the Rio Grande draining through basically the center of New Mexico. Some people may be familiar with Bandelier National Monument, a Park Service unit in the landscape. And you're going to start to see red blotches come up on your screen. Those red blotches are not fires per se, but they're fires over roughly decadal periods that had high severity. So oftentimes a wildfire can have unburned areas within it, lightly burned, medium burned, and then high severity burn. It's kind of a way we think about wildfires in quantifying their intensity on a landscape. And I'm just highlighting the high severity pixels. The actual footprint of the burns were bigger. And you can see in the 70s, there were some burns around Bandelier National, or a big fire around Bandelier National Monument. Then there was a fire that encompassed one of the peaks around Santa Clara Pueblo, Chacoma Peak, I believe. And then in the early 2000s, there were quite a bit of high severity fire acres on the landscape. And then in 2011, you can see, or in between 2010 and now, in the last decade, there's quite a bit of high severity fire on the landscape. And for those of you not familiar with looking at air photos, you know, we have the bottom of the watershed here at the Rio Grande, and all these areas are the upper parts of the watershed that high severity fire means that it lost a lot of vegetation and that the soils were burned at a high heat. So I'm going to pass this over to Daniel now, because what does high severity fire look like? So to give people context for what that looks like on the ground.
All right, thank you, Eytan. And you can kind of tell from the pictures there, you know, a lot of the area. And if you look to the right, you'll see Chacoma Peak, which Eytan had mentioned in there, in his conversation there. And when we looked at all of this, you know, and he was talking about the high severity burn, you know, we looked at well over 50% of the watershed being impacted by this fire at high severity. And, you know, a lot of the forested areas were just decimated, as you could tell, trees falling, and of course, a lot of the erosion that followed afterwards, which was caused a lot by the subsequent flooding that occurred right afterwards. And, you know, having several different flooding events, you know, we shifted gears from looking at dealing with the fire impacts, but now dealing with flooding. A lot of the sediment, and of course you can kind of see the erosion on the right side that was impacting the stem of the Santa Clara Creek, which we have about, I would say, 27 smaller tributaries that feed into the main stem of the creek. A lot of those areas we're starting to see a lot of erosion moving up the hillsides. And, you know, we took what we called a top-down approach and trying to cut off the erosion, installing a lot of one rock dams, log mattresses, and other structures in all of these tributaries. And we did manage to treat all 27, which was kind of amazing. And we put about 17,000 structures to try to reconnect the eroded parts of those canyons, because a lot of the water was not really dissipating over the landscape. Of course, the soils were hydrophobic and really hardened by the fire. So a lot of that water was just running off and causing severe erosion. And, you know, kind of getting those areas so we could reconnect them, we put those structures in place. And, you know, dealing with that in the past, you know, 7-8 years, we're starting to see a lot more stuff come back, and kind of that reconnection again to the water, and the tributaries kind of healing itself, especially after, you know, we did all the planting and all the other stuff that goes along with it. But that's just kind of an example of what we're looking at. And again, going back to, you know, what does the high severity fire look like? Of course, when soon after that fire, like I had mentioned, the soils being hydrophobic, it almost looked like a moonscape. You know, areas that did have the still standing wood, we were able to go back in and kind of contour fell along some of those slopes to kind of slow down the erosion as well. So, you know, there was a lot of stuff that went into putting things back the way they were. You know, the tribe was very concerned with the youth here, because we had a big disconnect. You know, since the time of some of those fires, and well back to the Rio Grande fire, the canyon was closed even to the tribal members, because it was just too dangerous for people to go in there, because of a lot of the stuff that was falling down, a lot of the erosion that was occurring, and, you know, the sediment deposition into the creek, which caused pretty much 100% fish kill. And, you know, like I had mentioned in the past, you know, several 8 years, we've managed to put about over 800,000 seedlings up in these areas. We've done a lot of masticating, again, going back to one rock dams, log mattresses, contour felling, stuff like that to kind of help Mother Nature out and reconnect some of these areas. And so far, you know, we've had a lot of success in reconnecting some of these areas. Again, you know, putting over 17,000 structures, you got to take into consideration a lot of things that the guys have to go through here and our crews, which actually had to hike into some of these areas, which were well over, you know, a 45-minute walk or even, you know, 2 hours to get there. So you're looking at a travel time of an hour to get there by vehicle, and then having to walk in with your equipment. So it was a big challenge. And, you know, dealing with some of that high severity, and we're still seeing those impacts. We're still seeing some of the scouring going on and some of the sediment deposition coming off of some of these areas, but not as bad as it was. Like I had mentioned, they had 4 recreation ponds that were basically stocked with fish. They were just about to transition their headwaters over to a stocking of native fish. And of course that was pushed back, and, you know, we lost a lot of the upper portions of the watershed, and things are now on hold. Fortunately, you know, because of all the work that we've done, we've actually gotten to a point now where we can start considering putting fish back in. But of course, you know, it's still challenges finding areas for the fish that need pools to keep from freezing in the wintertime, and also shading in the summertime. A lot of the trees were lost, a lot of the vegetation, and, you know, we have limited reclamation. We're seeing, you know, just slightly some areas coming back, and of course with succession, you know, you see the grasses, you see the brush, and then finally other trees and stuff starting to come back. So, you know, we're starting to see some of that stuff gradually work its way back. And like I had mentioned, you know, over the past 8 years, it's been a real big challenge, and trying to piece together everything.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I've always been impressed with the work you and the rest of the forestry department at Santa Clara have done to look at the whole problem of these high severity fires on the landscape, and to think through all those different timelines, all those strategies. I'm not, for those that have clicked through on the link in the chat to the ArcGIS link, you'll see the excellent story map that Santa Clara Pueblo developed that really tells this story that Daniel was describing. And there are some videos in there of the flooding events, which are pretty impactful because of, you know, just how powerful those flood events were. So I encourage folks to check that out and really dig deeper. So the science context, just because I saw that there's quite a few universities as part of the group here. And so I wanted to just touch on 2 papers that I thought were foundational to kind of underlying what's happening here. So the first one is a 2012 paper from Park Williams and many others. And the part that really hit home for me is that, you know, they developed this forest drought stress index, and they modeled that by, you know, mid 21st century, or in 30 years from now, the Southwest will regularly exceed the 16th century mega drought. So some of you may have heard of, you know, the 1500s in the Southwest was really dry, and it had a lot of impacts on people and the land. And so for that to be kind of regular here is really hits home as someone who lives in the landscape. The other side of the science is, you know, obviously there's Daniel described a lot of things, you know, fish, soil. I kind of focus on forests. So I'm going to just mention the the resilience of forests. But here's a paper, Brian et al. From 2019. And that group of researchers developed a framework for understanding resilience of southwestern forests. And they found that managing within the HRV, which is the historic range of variability, which is how forests were resilient in the past prior to fire suppression, and basically prior to 1880, when wildfires moved in a kind of natural fashion around the Southwest. They found that managing within that range of tree densities and the process of fire being in those forests is the best bet to keep our forests as forests. So to keep them from turning into grasslands or to shrublands, and to set them up so that the forest can withstand fire, climate change, drought, insects. So these two kind of papers for me really underlie what we'll get to in a minute, is kind of the partnership that the Pueblo and the Forest Stewards Guild have worked on in the last 4 years. So Daniel, I'll pass it over to you to kind of keep sharing kind of your and the Pueblo's approach to managing these complex issues.
Okay, well, thanks again. There's, a lot to talk about, especially when it comes to the amount of work that we put in for this post-firing, managing for resilience. When we looked at it, we had to make sure that our crews were trained up, not only for the felling operations, wildfire and stuff like that, but we also had them swift water trained to deal with flooding. And they consulted with a lot of professionals as far as replacing and stabilizing everything that was there. When it comes to tree planting, the putting of structures, the best way where they should go, in what places to create reconnecting those soils so we could get the water to spread over the landscape a little bit better and kind of stop some of that erosion that was coming down, and stabilizing some of the banks, and again, going back to that erosion, but also looking again, training aspect of everything, and the hours that the guys put in, taking into account everything that had to be done. When it came down to the top-down approach, a lot of stuff that we had done was a little experimental. So we kind of worked with it, made a few mistakes, learned by them, but kept moving forward, and trying to create the best that we could, putting things back the way it was. If you look at the Pueblo of Santa Clara, we're here since time immemorial, and we're still going to be here for the future. We can't change our culture, and our way of thinking, because it ties into the land and everything that they do, with their songs, with their prayers, in their hearts. There's sacred and traditional uses for some of those trees and other stuff that's there. So we have to take that into consideration as well. Also looking at, climatic impacts as what are we looking at that's coming back? We can't change our traditional ways from since time immemorial. Those songs, like I said, have been in their ancestors' hearts and with the people for so long. We want to make sure that we still have that connection with everything, making sure that the tribal youth is involved in helping get this back, because like we said, there's a disconnect between the youth as well. Some of the kids here haven't seen that area at all, period, since these fires have happened. And they don't know what that experience was, to go out, to go fishing, to go hunting, to go get stuff that their families needed, and again, tying back to the cultural significance of everything. Like I said, it was dear to them in their hearts and their songs and their prayers. And, it's a big impact, not only just to the land, but to the people as well. You look at some people, like I had mentioned, haven't been back up there. And when they do go up there, they're just, it's not the way they remember it. And it breaks their heart. So, we're trying the best that we can to kind of adapt that approach and make sure that we're trying to put everything back and get it back to almost the way it was. But again, now looking at climate change and other things that we have to deal with, and the future and going into the future, we're not going to stop trying to put some of this stuff back. We're going to still try to do our best that we can to help Mother Nature out. And it's our time now to help her and put things back into perspective, using both the, a little bit of science and also that traditional knowledge that goes along with it.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Thanks for sharing that. It was powerful. I was going to highlight the picture on the left of the ponderosa tree with the fire underneath it, because that's, you saw all those logos earlier on of all the partners Santa Clara is working with on their kind of, really massive undertaking to tend to the mountains. And I played a small part in that photo of that tree. And one part of it is the forests that haven't burned in high severity, still paying attention to them and tending to them so that they are set up to be resilient for the kind of the hot, dry present and the hot, dry future that we're anticipating. And so that photo came from a prescribed burn that was is part of the partnership between the Pueblo of Santa Clara and the Forest Stewards Guild, where the Pueblo of Santa Clara and the guild, the guild had a person that could help get the fire going, also known as the burn boss, and the Pueblo had the workforce and the management vision to kind of keep their eye on both the post-fire landscape and all those issues, the fish, the soils, and also tending to these forests that hadn't burned at high severity. And together we were able to put fire back into those forests so that they could be ready for that hotter, drier conditions and be more resilient. So it was really powerful for me to be part of that burn, and we have a few more planned. And hopefully we can, kind of work through that and tend to those forests that weren't impacted by high severity fire, and hopefully won't be because of these actions.
Thank you, Eytan. That's a good point, and glad you brought that up. Like you had mentioned, we are still really active with managing with fire and hoping that even into the future we can get it more sustainable, where we can actually let some of these natural occurrences such as lightning fires to clean up the forests again, and be comfortable with the people here as well, seeing fire within those areas, especially after the impacts and the fire itself, those fires that had the impacts from them. And, people's perception of them is, hey, we don't want everything to burn up. We don't want to lose everything again. And that's important because we want to also build that resiliency within the trees and what's left. So again, like Eytan had mentioned, is, you know, looking into the future and utilizing more fire as a tool than anything.
Great. So that, like I said, we didn't want to go through a million slides. So I'm not sure if anything came through on poll everywhere, Cody, but I did see a comment in the chat about the Aspen regeneration. And I am not 100% sure if that was Aspen regeneration in that burned area or if that was a weed or understory plant that just was very green and looked like aspen seedlings. But Daniel, maybe you know, you can speak more to if there was any aspen regeneration that is helping you in your kind of post-fire restoration efforts.
You know, interesting that you would mention that. Yes, we're seeing quite a few big pockets of aspen coming in, and more than likely that is what it is. We're doing some nucleation planting now along the landscape where we're identifying some of those areas where we would think it would be more beneficial to put trees in, because if you look at over those landscapes, and you can kind of see from the this picture here, looking at the total background and, you know, everything that's been impacted by fire, high severity fire, we're able to see where those springs are now, and again, placing some of those trees in areas where we think they're going to have a better survivability in those impacted areas. And that's because, of course, you can kind of see where a lot of those pockets of aspen are starting to pop up in some of those cooler, wetter areas. So it's actually doing a lot of good, even for us. And of course, you know, the wildlife, the elk are enjoying it. There's quite a bit of elk up there, so they're also enjoying that as well.
Hopefully not too much, because we know elk can mow down aspen seedlings pretty effectively.
That, and they can go for our willows and stuff that we actually planted along the creek's edge. But you know, we've took into consideration that as well, and the impacts even from cattle. You know, we've had issues with Forest Service that borders both our north and south boundaries, that all these areas where we're planting stuff, you know, you're having cattle going in there during, you know, times where it's real stressful, not a lot of green up, you know, of course, times during the summer where it's really dry. And of course, where do they go? They go right into those areas where we planted and where it's green. And you're correct with that. But, you know, I think with a lot of that aspen regeneration, it kind of helps in providing, you know, the wildlife with a little bit of stability as well.
Okay. Also, at this time, we haven't had anybody asking questions with poll everywhere. So if you do have any questions, we can go ahead and open up mic since we are a bit of a smaller group, or you can add your questions in the chat. I personally had a question about your youth. Have you seen an increase of the youth involvement, and what activities do they get to do in participation?
Actually, we have, and you know, we partnered up with the Santa Fe Indian School, and just before COVID hit, we had about 300 students from the high school come up and actually assisted with doing some stream restoration. They actually got to get out and do some cone collection and planting. They got their hands on a little bit of everything, and it's good to see the youth engaged in that. And the good part about that is some of those areas are really remote, so their cell phones didn't work, and they were actually had to pay attention to what was going on. But we also work with the Santa Fe Indian School, but also here with our local community school. And we try to get some of the seniors engaged with the 6th grade class to, develop plans such as monitoring plans, helping us establish that, but also with the planting. So we get them quite involved with a number of things. Hopefully now, with COVID kind of subsiding and we'll keep our fingers crossed that things get a lot better here in the future, that we're able to start bringing the youth back in. And like I said, it's had its challenges in the past year because of the COVID situation, but we're starting to get more engaged again. And like I had mentioned, we recognized early on that there was a disconnect with the youth, and that was very important with the tribe to make sure that we involved them, to give them, accountability in some of this stuff, so that way they understand the importance and they don't lose that perspective and try to say, well, I'll just look on my computer instead of trying to go up there. But like I said, they've been really interested and they've been great, and it's been wonderful actually to be working with some of the youth out here.
Daniel, I have a follow-up question to Cody's. The forestry department has been working hard on, dealing with the high severity fire since at least, 2001 after the Rio Grande fire. And so that's 20 years now. Have any of the youth through the various youth corps or classroom engagements, have any of them kind of transitioned to work for the forestry department or to work for the Pueblo in a kind of land management capacity?
They have, and actually we were able to get some funding this year to actually put 5 of the youth up there. We had to start kind of small because, again, dealing with some of the COVID restrictions and stuff like that, we still have to follow protocols. And even into the future, we're taking into consideration utilizing more youth at that capacity. So for sure. And I hope that answers your question.
It does. And that's really great that more youth are getting involved, because eventually they're going to be the ones taking the lead on these cultural burns and such. Does anybody, we would like to open up the mics or the chat for anybody that has any questions that has come up to them through this presentation and dialogue.
Yeah, I could. This is Derek Rosendahl, the Climate Adaptation Science Center. Yeah, I was just looking at your maps. So I was just wondering if the surrounding regions, if you've been able to work with them, because obviously if the forests around you aren't being kept up and the gigantic fires start and sweep in, that limits how much you can protect your land. So I just wondered, have the surrounding communities been helping, or I guess the state and federal communities have been working alongside you so that the entire forest ecosystem, yeah, that's a good map, so that the whole area is protected? Yeah,
for sure. And we've been working and collaborating with quite a few agencies, and like I had mentioned, we have Forest Service, which is north and south of the borders, but also on our western borders we have the Valles Caldera and Park Service there. And there's a new program that the tribe has been involved with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is the Resilient Landscape programs that the Bureau of Indian Affairs has, and they've actually been providing funding to do off-reservation projects. We have taken a good look at those fires that have occurred off reservation, and a lot of them well, I would say all of them have started off of reservation and have come onto the reservation, again with high severity burns. But we also take into consideration, the challenges out there with disease and insect. Those types of things don't see borders, and of course, they move back and forth within the systems, and that's where we're able to actually get off reservation and start treating some of those areas up around our borders to deal with those issues and those impacts that we're looking at these days, and ultimately that are going to result in a lot of the bigger wildfires that you're seeing.
Yeah, and Derek, I'd add to that, add to Daniel's answer that there have been three really large initiatives on kind of the map that you see before you. There was the Southwest Jemez landscape restoration. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but kind of covered a little bit of Santa Clara Pueblo lands, but focused on the caldera and to the southwest. And Santa Clara Pueblo is a collaborator on that. Another initiative is a new Rio Chama collaborative forest landscape restoration project. These are 10-year projects. There's only been 24 or 25 around the country now. And this other one is kind of to the north of everything, kind of just to the north of the Santa Clara Pueblo boundary. And the Pueblo sits on the executive committee of that collaborative, and so very engaged there. And then in the high severity patch that you're seeing on the map, that blotch of red, there's a Eastern Jemez Landscape Futures Project led by a bunch of collaborators, including the Nature Conservancy of New Mexico, to deal with kind of that heavily burned landscape. And so they're doing lots of tree planting and other work as well. I guess there's a fourth one I'll mention is the Rio Grande Water Fund, which is a payment for ecosystem services everywhere from Albuquerque up to southern Colorado. It's a really big landscape. There's 80 signatories onto that water fund. And through that water fund, actually, I work with Daniel on another project called the All Hands, All Lands Burn Team, which I should have mentioned earlier. But that is a kind of additive capacity for prescribed fire in that landscape, in this big landscape, bigger than what you're seeing here on the screen. And we work both, on the Pueblo lands, like we were talking about, but also off the Pueblo lands in other areas of the mountains you see, on the screen and in other places. And so we try to either lead burns where possible or add capacity to other burns, so that because we know there's a prescribed fire backlog for these frequent fire forests.
Thank you. From Virginia Seamster, she's wondering what kind of success or mortality with replanted Ponderosa pine and other conifer tree plantings you have had. Have some formerly forested sites proven to be too hot or dry to support the forest after the Las Conchas and other fires?
For sure, and I kind of typed a response in there, and we've seen about 40% success with our planting, which is pretty typical with Ponderosa pine. A lot of the Douglas fir, everything that we have planted out there, again, has been about around a little less than 40%. That's why we kind of shifted gears, and soon after the Las Conchas, utilizing bear and bar funds, we had to plant large amount of trees in a short period of time, which a lot of those areas again were hot, dry. The soils just weren't ready, and we saw a lot of kill back in those areas, and we decided, well, we need to take a better look at this. So when we did pull back, we partnered up with the one of the universities in Mora, to do some nucleation planting. Again, that was looking over the landscape and determining where we could see, like again, some of those aspen areas where we figured they were doing really well, and some of those springs and seeps that we could start putting, smaller patches of trees and getting better success, and hopefully they then increasing the numbers, but also getting it to kind of spread out over the landscape. Understanding that we're dealing with a lot of the soils out there that still are impacted by planting and not much success. We're seeing limited reclamation, and of course those are the dry sites that we're talking about.
I have a question. Have there been sites or regions that you've seen a little bit more success in as opposed to other, whether it's because it's closer to or higher up or closer to like the water areas, or is it mainly just where burn has highly impacted and that you're seeing less success, or have you seen any indication of that?
We have, and I think it's just a combination, across the landscape. A lot of it with the hydrophobic soils, but also, there's really nothing out there. It's kind of moonscaped. So there's nothing really shading anything, but looking at better success in those north-facing slopes. Again, just because you have the shadings there, and the springs and the seeps seem to be doing a lot better in those areas. So, definitely. When you're looking, this is I guess the desert Southwest. So when you think about it, you're going to see dry sites, and typically on those south-facing slopes. Again, we're doing our best to try to figure out, strategically where we should be placing some of these trees where we can get better success. And I think with doing that nucleation planting, we're starting to look at that again through that lens where we're going to have a lot more success in those areas where they should be coming back.
Thank you, Brian.
I have a question about kind of the areas that are more impacted by the fires. Are there any plants that maybe are not indigenous to the area that haven't previously been planted that you guys have considered planting, maybe in areas where the soil is especially dry?
We have, and even doing, some of the prescribed burns soon after, we've seen a lot of invasives pop up, and, a lot of the things and what we kind of figured was, coming out, we had a lot of contractors that were in some of these areas that were actually out of state. And I think, of course, they were, at the time, we were in a rush to try to get them up there. And we weren't taking into the consideration that they were actually moving some of those invasives in their wheelbases and stuff like that. So, we kind of took a good look at everything again, and came up with a plan to start dealing with some of those invasives. The tribe has been very adamant in not using aerial seeding, just because a lot of the seeds that are in there are, aren't pure. There's a certain amount of invasives, and if we're going to throw stuff like that over a large landscape, it's going to be harder for us to deal with some of those invasives down the road. So we've been very cautious as to what we're putting in some of those outlying areas that are out there, and working with our neighbors also to help collect some of those seeds that they might have, and kind of bring them back across this side so we can get what's naturally out there to come back. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I hadn't fully considered like the impact of fires on invasive species, but that's really interesting.
For sure, there's a lot to think about, and as you go along, some things kind of just pop up, and some of them are invasive. So, trying to figure out where they come from and how they're pushed to certain areas, like even with trespassing cattle, we can see that problem as well too.
Would anybody else like to open up their mics and ask any further questions? All right, I'm not getting anybody else and no other questions in the chat, except Eytan did add in the chat New Mexico State University's John Harrington's Tree Research Station. So I did pull up the link to that. So if anybody wants to follow that and read more on that as well, along with all the other information that was added, you can. I would like to thank Eytan and Daniel for joining us today and giving a wonderful presentation and the great dialogue that happened afterwards and answering all of our questions. This was really wonderful for all of us to hear, and we appreciate it. Thank you, everybody that was able to join us today. We appreciate you joining us and joining us in the dialogue as well. Later on today, we will be sending out an email when we do have the webinar posted online, along with any further readings and links that we can provide you guys for more information down the line. And
I was just going to say thanks, Cody, Erica, and your whole team for coordinating and hosting this. It was good to chat, and I appreciate the time.
I would like to thank both Cody and the same. Thank you.
thank you guys. We appreciate you guys joining us.
Thank you guys.
And with that, we'll call it a close. I hope everybody has a wonderful week.